Hello everyone, my name is Ganesh and welcome to this lecture series on key management ratios. We will handle this at two levels. One basic for those who are uninitiated to the topics concerned here, and those who have familiarity with accounting, finance and some amount of basic ratios which they already understand. We will have an advanced level going forward. So let's start at the basic level, and let me give you a background first on what ratio analysis and basic terminologies what they mean. So let's look at the background. The questions that arise when I talk or say a word like ratio analysis first is what is ratio, what is then ratio analysis, why is it needed, what does it mean in the context of a business, what are the objectives of doing such an analysis, and so on and so forth. So the first part, I think, for those who have very little understanding of what ratio is all about, let me just give you a flavor of what it is before I proceed further into understanding a more detailed way how we look at ratio analysis from a management perspective. Essentially, ratio is nothing but a relationship between two figures. When I say figures, I mean numbers, okay, expressed in some form of arithmetical terms. Okay. Now, there are many names to this like proportion, percentage, fraction. Let me give you some examples to explain this, which will give you a better idea as to what I am trying to say. Let's take there is a class of say 45 students, of which 30 are boys and 15 are girls. Now, if I were to look at it from different perspectives, one way to say is there are 15 more boys than girls in the class. The other way to say is if there are 30 boys and 15 girls, there are 2 times boys, then there are girls in the class. That is 30 by 15 divided by 15. Or one more way of looking at it is saying that there are half of the students are that is in the total of 30, 15 by 30 would mean that the proportion of girls in the class is 50% or half of that of the boys. So that is another perspective of looking at it. A third way to look at it would be to say how many girls are there in the total number of students in the class. Now, as I said, there are 15 girls, total number of students is 45, so about 15 by 45 or 1/3 of the total is girls. Similarly, 30 by 45, which is 2/3 of the class is boys. Now, these are different perspectives which gives you an idea in terms of what is the proportion of boys in the class, what is the proportion of girls in the class, how many boys are more in terms of the times the number of girls, etc. Now, these are basically captured in terms such as proportion, percentage or fractions. Now, why do we do this kind of analysis? Now, let me explain this with another example. Assume the price of cement in the north of India was 1 year back about 225, and in South India 250 per bag, rupees 225 and rupees 250 per bag. Over the year it changed. While in the north the cement price per bag moved to say rupees 275, and in south of India it changed from 250 to rupees 300. So what has happened? 225 to 275 and 250 to 300, which means it's a 50 rupee change over the year. Now, are builders in north and south equally affected? If this is something that we need to understand or analyze, if you look at just the magnitude of change, that is 50 rupees, you will assume that they are equally affected. But if you start looking that the price in the north was only 225 and it moved to 275, that means as a proportion how much has it moved, which is 50 by 225, which gives you approximately 22%. But in south the same 50 rupee movement was on 250 rupees, which will do a 50 by 250, which is about 20%, which means the builders in the north have been worse off during the year compared to the builders in south. This is just to give you a perspective as to how ratio and ratio analysis can be looked at in a very generic sense. Okay. Now let's look from a business perspective or a business context. Most of us, especially those who've been working in firms, companies and businesses, have come across the number of terms, I mean both externally and internally. Within the organization you hear people talking about it, you have news channels talking about it, you have magazines talking about it. Number of terminologies, jargons are used such as profits, assets, funds, dividends, shares, costs, cash flow and so on and so forth. The question then arises is, many of us have some idea what it is, or many of us may know individually what these terms may mean. But when I start putting it together, when I start understanding how these work together, come together in a business context, in a financial context in a business, then many of us are lost. It's quite mystifying for many of us as to how they work. For example, a change in asset, how can it affect profit? Or the change in the loans figure, how can it affect my profit? Or how the loans figure can affect my funds, etc. So these sensitivities we don't tend to understand unless we can put this puzzle together and understand it in cohesion. Now this is what we are trying to now say through the analysis of ratios and so on and so forth. We are trying to bring this understanding of various components and bring them together into one form. Now let me explain this further with some more detail.